Coming up on Choppers Politics.
I'm the same age as the Prime Minister. I can't change. I am what I am, Chris. And I don't honestly believe the Prime Minister can change. And he can't. I don't think he can undo what's been done.
Boris Johnson did something he hates doing this week. He said,
I want to apologise.
I'm Christopher Hope, the Telegraph's associate editor, and this is Choppers Politics. If the Prime Minister thought the new year would herald a clean slate, he was very much mistaken. There's been a constant stream, nay a waterfall of allegations around so-called Partygate, but for now, just for now, Boris Johnson limps on. In the House of Commons, a few members of the opposition parties called for his resignation during this week's Prime Minister's questions and appealed directly to Tory MPs, who hold their leader accountable if he wouldn't step down himself, to help out. So with that in mind, let's start this podcast today with a Brexiteer Tory MP making a bold move. Andrew Bridgen, welcome to Choppers Politics.
Hi, Chris.
Good to have you on. Thank you for joining us remotely from Leicestershire. Andrew, now listen, I'm going to take you back in time to June the 4th, 2019. You wrote on Twitter the following: there is one candidate to become Conservative Party leader who is a proven winner, a committed Brexiteer, and who has the vision for a post-Brexit Britain. That's why I will back Boris to be the next leader of the Conservative Party. Do you still feel that way?
I don't feel that way now, given current events, but I don't regret my decision in 2019 to back Boris to deliver an election victory, get Brexit done. Those were the reasons I voted for him, and he's delivered on that. One thing I didn't vote for Boris to be leader of the Conservative Party is that he was going to be a great administrator of the government. I considered that he would have a lot of very capable people round him who would do a lot of the heavy lifting and the detail work, and let Boris do what he's good at, which is selling our policies, representing the government, and winning elections.
Is that what's gone wrong with Boris Johnson, that he's lost this team of people around him who can do the heavy lifting, in your words, and let Boris be Boris?
I think that's certainly part of it. Perhaps Boris was badly affected by having COVID the other year. I think people have noticed a step change there in him. But ultimately, the issues that we've seen arise over the last 6-7 weeks, the culmination of that is that I think he's lost the moral authority to command the nation. Thankfully, I think we're coming to the very end of COVID now. I'm pushing hard for us to have all restrictions lifted on or before the 26th of January. I think that the virus has gone endemic now. The next variant will be more transmissible than Omicron and almost certainly even milder. We couldn't, no measures have contained the spread of Omicron, and we never were going to. So we certainly won't be able to contain the next virus mutation. So as far as I'm concerned, the restrictions and measures taken to combat it are over. We've got through that. But ultimately, if we had to go into a lockdown situation or the government had to ask the population to make sacrifices, I think given the events that have unfolded and what we've seen about breaking of restrictions at number 10, I just don't think the Prime Minister has the moral authority to be able to ask or expect the public to follow whatever guidance he had to give in those circumstances. And for those reasons, that makes his position untenable.
So what have you done about this?
I have written a letter of no confidence to Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922 committee.
And that's gone. That's been received by Sir Graham. He has the letter now.
He's had the letter for a little while, yes.
When you write a letter to Sir Graham Brady, what happens? Does he send you an acknowledgement?
Well, I actually took it. I don't trust the internal post, so I actually took it round to his office in Portcullis House by hand and handed it into his senior secretary and pointed out that it was a very confidential letter, and I think she's been with him a long time and she understands what that means.
And has Sir Graham mentioned it to you since? You must have seen him around the House of Commons. Does he give you a nod?
No, not at all. People have asked me how many letters are in. I do not know. All I can tell you is I know there's one in. And Sir Graham Brady is of the highest integrity and would never divulge how many letters are in at any time.
Well, as a journalist who often, well, I don't ask him anymore, but in the past has asked him, I know you're completely correct. He never tells you anything. You said there that Boris Johnson has proven he hasn't been the right man really to show moral leadership in these lockdowns. But if, as you say, we are leaving the issue of COVID, if COVID is being left behind, it's now endemic, not pandemic, as you said, why not give Boris Johnson a chance to prove he's the PM outside of a COVID pandemic?
I think you can't have a leader who does not have the confidence of the public should that emergency arise. That's not a situation I can leave the country in. And the leader, by the very meaning of the word, as far as I'm concerned, is someone who leads by example. That means they do not ask the public to accept any privations set upon them by the government if those at the very top of government aren't willing to accept them and abide by them themselves. And I'm afraid that what we've seen is that Number 10 and the people there have not been willing to abide by the rules they've set for other people. And that is unacceptable to me. And it's deeply unacceptable to the people who have abided by the rules, the people who've not been able to visit dying relatives, not being able to attend funerals, not being able to attend family gatherings. The people who've made those sacrifices, they feel rightly let down, and I think betrayed is not too strong a word. And that trust won't come back easily. And even if you accepted everything that's gone on over the last 7 weeks, I can't help but be almost certain that there's more of these revelations to come. And this is not going to end. It's been pitiful watching the way that Dominic Cummings has dealt with this matter. And he's like a cat and the Prime Minister's his mouse. He's playing with the Prime Minister. There'll be more information coming out, more embarrassment. And when the cat's got the mouse, however long it takes, we always know how it's going to end up, don't we, Chris?
Yes, the mouse hasn't got long. I suppose, though, we don't actually know that Dominic Cummings is the source of any of this. We know that he wrote that email last Friday disclosing the details of this May 20th, 2020 garden party for 100 people who invited, 30 or so came. We know that much. We don't know what else has come from Dominic Cummings, and the journalists behind those stories are not telling us that.
Are you seriously accepting that Mr. Reynolds, who's a civil servant who works for the Prime Minister, sent an email to 100 people inviting them to the Prime Minister's garden of Number 10 for a party, bring your own bottles, and the Prime Minister wasn't fully aware of what was going on?
That's what the PM says, and we'll have to wait and see what Sue Gray says about that.
Well, in that case, then why is Mr. Reynolds still in position?
Did you abide by all the rules during the pandemic? I mean, to me, the heart of this question is clearly the rules that the PM was imposing on the rest of us. I would argue he probably would have argued against them had he still been writing for the Telegraph, and perhaps that is at the heart of this. He was pushing forward with privations on our lives that he knew he wouldn't want to tolerate himself. I wondered how you felt about that. Did you always abide by the rules?
I certainly did, as far as certainly the spirit of the rules. Obviously, it was a very long lockdown. Yeah, I mean, I didn't invite people round to my house.
No BYOBs at Bridgen Towers?
Certainly not. And I have got a rather larger garden than Number 10, and I didn't have lots of people around at my house in the garden when it was restricted to one person outdoors. You can't have that authority to make rules which curtail the freedoms of the populace and not accept them themselves. That's just against the great British tradition of fair play, Chris.
In an excoriating article for the Telegraph today, and we'll put a link to that in the show notes to this episode, you describe a moral vacuum at the heart of government. You also talk about a Prime Minister who doesn't know what right from wrong is. But surely that's the same individual who you voted for in 2019. He can't suddenly have forgotten what right from wrong is since he became Prime Minister. So I go back to that first question. Why do you vote for him in the first place?
I voted for him because I knew that he was a winner. I've seen his effect on the voting public. He campaigned with me in northwest Leicestershire when I was leading the Leave campaign for the East Midlands in Ashby-de-la-Zouch, in my constituency, on the eve of the referendum. And he'd got the stardust. I mean, people were far outside his London base of support. He's very, very popular out on the streets. People wanted to be seen with him. People wanted to shake hands with him. And he was fundamental in delivering that leave vote. However, we are where we are, and the qualities required to move the country forward, you need that moral authority, should you need to use it, to impose restrictions on people at some time in the future, or even any rules. I mean, and we're always legislating, so we're always making rules for people, and then you can't do that if you've lost the public confidence. And quite honestly, from my own experience of watching the emails come in yesterday calling for the Prime Minister to go, they actually accelerated. The number of emails increased after the apology, the so-called apology yesterday in the chamber. This is not going to go away. I think it's going to get worse. If the Prime Minister loves our country, loves our democracy, as I believe he does, and loves the Conservative Party, I've asked that he should do the decent thing, stand down and leave our party with a semblance of grace, and he will be widely respected and remembered for the great things he's done, delivering Brexit, the rollout of the vaccine, getting us out of COVID. But I'm afraid now it's time for someone else to take over the leadership of the Conservative Party and also de facto Prime Minister.
You imply in your criticism of Boris Johnson that he's the wrong leader for now, and you make quite an interesting connection in the article with Winston Churchill, don't you?
Yes, Boris has written a very famous biography of Winston Churchill, and there has been much comparison, and there are many analogies of himself and Winston Churchill. They both could have had American citizenship. They're both journalists before they came into politics. They're both very eloquent manipulators, shall we say, of the motivators of the English language for their causes, and both of them have seen us through very difficult times. Winston Churchill saw us through the Second World War. Boris Johnson, our politics was in meltdown when he became Prime Minister. Our democracy was actually under threat because we'd had a referendum which Parliament was thwarting the will of the people in their faces. We've had a general election, we've got a majority, we've delivered Brexit. We've had this awful pandemic, which I'm hoping we're going to get out of in the next couple of weeks completely, and we'll be hopefully the first country in the Northern Hemisphere to completely do so, and that will set us up very well for a recovery. However, all those successes and those great things he's done for the country cannot take away the fact that he's seriously damaged himself by the revelations that we've seen, and what was clearly an attempt to, if I'm being generous, to stretch the truth to cover the fact that Number 10 and its inhabitants had broken the lockdown rules themselves that they'd set for other people.
Do you actually want Boris Johnson to quit? Or is this letter from you just a shot across the bows to try and get him to improve his ways?
I'm the same age as the Prime Minister. I can't change. I am what I am, Chris. And I don't honestly believe the Prime Minister can change. And he can't. I don't think he can undo what's been done. And that's even if there aren't more revelations to come. And I absolutely think there is going to be more revelations over the next few days and possibly weeks. It's detracting from his ability to run the government. It's detracting from the government's ability to run the country. And when you get to that stage, I think the damage is irrevocable and it's terminal. That means that his position, unfortunately, is untenable.
When do you want Boris Johnson gone by?
I think if he were to announce now that there'll be a leadership election, he'll follow through and be the caretaker until that election, and he'll hand over, and that's in a timely period of 2 or 3 months, 3 months. I think that would be acceptable, and that would draw a line under the matter. And I think if he left politics, then he will leave with a great deal of gratitude from a large proportion of our population for the efforts that he's done on our behalf, delivering Brexit, getting us out of the pandemic. He will have delivered all of that. That's his legacy. I don't want him to be hounded out of office. It'll damage him. It'll damage the country, damage our democracy, damage the Conservative Party. But the end result will be the same. I honestly believe that the Prime Minister his position is untenable, and it's a matter of when and not if. And I want him to be remembered for the man who delivered Brexit, got us out of the pandemic, and also the man who knew when it was the right time to leave the stage with some grace and remain in the affection of a grateful nation.
Is a leadership challenge, this upheaval, really what the country needs right now, given we are still in the pandemic?
I didn't ask for us to be put in this situation. I don't think any Conservatives on the backbenches asked for us to be put in this situation. But as we often say in politics, Chris, we are where we are and we have to deal with it. My analysis of the situation is, as I've told you, and I think secretly that's the analysis of a lot of Conservative MPs and certainly most of the people outside the Westminster bubble. And ultimately, they're the people we represent, Chris.
And just finally, what would you say to the Prime Minister when he hears your words on this podcast? He'll be disappointed with you. He'll say, Andrew, what are you doing? Come on, trust in me, that kind of thing. What would you say to him? He'll be upset, won't he?
Well, of course he'd be upset. Of course, anyone would be upset. I mean, I've been one of his staunchest supporters. I'm a Brexiteer. I supported his leadership bid. But we've got to a point where my loyalty to my country, Parliament and the Conservative Party has to override any personal relationship I have or have had with the Prime Minister. We have to have our priorities right, and ultimately we all serve this great nation, and the best interests will be served by the Prime Minister now standing down.
Andrew Bridgen, Conservative MP for North West Leicestershire since May 2010. Thank you for joining us today on Choppers Politics. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Right, do stay with us, listeners. We'll be returning to the subject of boozy bashes at number 10 right after this.
The Telegraph brings you a new podcast series, Eyewitness History.
Harry, will you take Meghan to be your wife?
The moments we all remember.
I will.
Told by Telegraph journalists who were there.
You remember how magical and remarkable it all was, and it makes you feel sad that they're no longer a part of the royal family.
Follow Eyewitness History in the same place you're listening to this.
Now, this week, the Tories took a nosedive in the polls, and concerns about those numbers are felt particularly by MPs elected in the not-so-safe Conservative seats in the area formerly known as the Red Wall. One of the 2019 cohort of Tory MPs is Miriam Cates, MP for Penistone and Stocksbridge. Miriam Cates, welcome to the Red Lion Pub in person.
Thank you, good to be here.
To mark this auspicious occasion, I'm going to give you a present, the first one ever. This is what is it? I'm giving it to you now.
It's a very attractive mug with a nice cartoon of you on the front, and on the back it says, I went on Choppers Politics and all I got was this lousy mug.
Exactly.
Thank you very much. I think I'll have to declare it, but it's very nice.
You have to declare it, yeah. I think it's below any surely any, it's barely worth anything, actually. With my face on it, it's actually
you've ruined it now.
It's got negative value. Welcome to the Choppers Politics. It's been a very busy day in Westminster. This reminds me somewhat of the Brexit wars I had to go through when I would end up in this basement dungeon at the Red Lion Pub, and we'd talk about existential issues to do with the government. You were in Prime Minister's Questions just a few hours ago. What was it like?
Well, actually, I wasn't in for most of Prime Minister's Questions because I had an urgent question straight afterwards on vaccinations. So I was preparing for that. But I did pop in for the last bit and I have watched the first bit back. So, yeah, I mean, it was packed. The atmosphere wasn't awful, but obviously people realised that this is very serious and people were very keen to hear what he had to say.
He looked apologetic. He said sorry.
Yeah.
At what point does he stop saying sorry and start sorting it out?
Well, I think the next step is to wait for the outcome of this inquiry by Sue Gray. We've had the apology. It's very welcome. I think what he said was important about recognising people's rage and also understanding that it was wrong to have that gathering, both for it to be organised and for him to go. But I do think we've had the apology. We've got to wait for the facts now. That is the next stage. What has come out in the last week is that those making the rules perhaps didn't follow them, but also didn't realise the cost of these rules to ordinary people. And I think, the people going into Downing Street every day and in government, of course they should be going into work. Nobody's questioning that. They had an important job to do. It was a time of national emergency. But because they were going into work every day, seeing each other, having that social interaction, I'm not talking about parties, but just, being around each other, having that company and that social interaction and that distraction, I suppose, from what else was going on, meant that they didn't really understand what it meant to be someone who'd been sent home from work to a studio flat, not able to see your friends and family, or to children who can't go to school and see their friends, and then their parents, like me, desperately trying to work from home, trying to educate their children. And I think, it wasn't a deliberate strategy to make other people suffer, but the fact is they weren't subject to the same kind of sacrifices that other people were, and I think that means that it was harder for them to really empathise with what people were going through.
How has the reaction been in your personal inbox as an MP?
Yeah, I've got quite a lot of emails from people, expressing their anger. It's almost catalysed this kind of reliving of that first lockdown. When I think back, they were very dark days for me, trying to manage being a new MP and being a mum and, my husband's business and all those kind of things. People really suffered. And I think there's almost this kind of delayed grief that's coming out when they remember back to what happened, having seen other people who perhaps weren't going through those same restrictions.
It was an existential threat to lots of us. No one knew when this would end.
Exactly.
How catching it was.
Yeah.
How fatal it was. We saw numbers in the hospitals about where it would end, who was going to die, would you see your family again?
And the message that was being put out by the government and officials was that we should be afraid. And, we can question that, whether that was A, ethical, and B, proportionate.
Yeah.
But then to see that the people who were giving those warnings actually didn't seem to feel that threat, again, that calls into question the purpose of the measures, doesn't it? And again, that makes people think, I made this sacrifice, was it worth it? Were we all in it together? So I think it's a form of grieving, really.
Do you think he might resign? I mean, he was asked that several times. In fact, from the seated position, MPs shouted out, but Keir Starmer said, will you resign? And he said, words the effect of, wait until the end of this inquiry. He didn't say he wouldn't resign.
I don't know is the answer to that, and obviously there's a lot of speculation, and I certainly don't think he should resign before the outcome of the inquiry, but you'd probably have to ask me again on that day.
Miriam, I know you're just 2 or 3 years into being an MP, so I'm sorry to put you on the spot. But
well, I genuinely don't know the answer.
You're being very frank. These are questions we don't know the answer to. I mean, if you look back over the piece on Boris Johnson's record over the COVID crisis, we're facing the inquiry starting in May, April-May time, soon. I mean, what do you think about that? Well,
I think, what has really frustrated me throughout the crisis is the lack of data comparisons and context. The mainstream media have put out figures like, 300 people died today from COVID, or...
That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people, because most people don't spend their days studying international death rates. However, if you know and understand that on a normal day, 1,500, 1,600 people die in this country of all causes, then of course those deaths are a sadness and we shouldn't be ignoring them. But it gives you a context of how much we should be afraid and how many resources and restrictions we should be putting into managing this. And I think if you look at us, our country, in international comparisons, we've done extraordinarily well. Given our age, given the fact that an enormous proportion of our population are overweight, given the fact that so many of us live in urban environments and therefore, are travelling more on public transport, we have done much better than many countries who locked down earlier, harder and for longer than us. And actually we've done worse than a country like Sweden, who haven't had formal lockdowns. And I think there's some really important epidemiological questions to ask about that, about whether lockdowns were and how effective they are. But yes, we've done remarkably well. And I think rolling out the vaccination early to vulnerable people was an absolutely brilliant success.
Buying so much in the first place?
Exactly. Absolutely. Credit to those in government who did that. That has allowed us to open up. And I think, yes, I voted against Plan B. Yes, I'm opposing current restrictions, especially in schools. But again, look at how free we are compared to other countries. Boris has held his nerve on that, and the vaccinations have paid off.
Now, back in your day job, and you mentioned children earlier, do you think they should be wearing masks in schools?
No, I really think they shouldn't be wearing masks in schools. And I'm on the Education Select Committee, and we had Robin Walker, who's the schools minister, this morning. And I challenged him about this because whilst I'm delighted that children are back to school, I think that there was a chance that wouldn't happen. I think Nadeem Zahawi's done a brilliant job in making very clear that schools aren't going to close. But it seems to me that the political price of it was to force children to wear masks. But I think the harms to children of this are significant. And I think, again, this is a kind of almost lack of empathy from people considering the data actually we need to put ourselves in the shoes of a child, who's, let's say, a year 7 child. They've missed the goodness of the last 2 years of primary school. They've missed the residential. They've missed their parents coming in to see them perform. They've started this new secondary school under huge restrictions. They've tested twice a week. Maybe they've been sent home for 2 weeks. Now they're back at school. They've got to cover their face. This is a massive deal.
Yes, of course. And your other big area you're concerned about is the teaching in schools. And we talk about trans ideology being promoted in primary schools. What sort of things are you referring to when we describe that, use that word?
Yeah, so I think this whole issue about gender identity and trans has obviously become quite a big issue over recent years. And I think we've seen a lot in the last year, actually, about the influence of groups such as Stonewall, not just in schools, but in public life. And there's been, a welcome opening up of debate. And I think my particular concerns around children are firstly kind of safeguarding issues. So in this country, we do have single-sex spaces. We do have sex-based rights, and that's based on the sex that you're born. And I think in schools, there's this confusion about what happens if a boy identifies as a girl. Should he be allowed to use the girls' change rooms and the girls' toilets? Now, in law, no. Of course, separate, sensitive facilities should be made. But, the girls have a right to a single-sex space. But I think that the influence of Stonewall and other kind of pro-trans lobbies has meant that head teachers and schools, they find it very difficult to make these decisions. And they need much clearer guidance from the DfE to say, this is an appropriate way of dealing with this that's sensitive, but also keeping girls safe. There is also a teaching and classroom issue. So I think, this idea of gender ideology, that you can change your sex, that you can change your gender, that you can choose your sex and gender is a new idea. I fully respect that some people believe in it, but it doesn't have a basis in science. And so the guidance from the DfE is that if you teach the idea of gender ideology, you should teach it as an idea, as a belief, not as a fact. And that you should also teach the fact that some people don't agree, and people, like myself, believe that there are 2 sexes. That's determined at conception, and absolutely express yourself how you want to, but you can't change your biological sex.
So you are born with a sex, but your gender can change in your life? Because
I don't think there's any kind of, gender is a kind of social idea, isn't it? Originally gender and sex made the same thing, and it's only over recent years meant the same thing, that they've come to mean different things. And I think the problem with a lot of the stuff that's being taught around this is it's almost going back to the pre-feminist, challenging of gender stereotypes. So girls who have short hair, like football and don't like pink are being told, instead of, well, that's a perfectly valid expression of being a woman, oh, you should be a boy. That almost seems to me to go backwards in time in terms of gender stereotypes. And that's the kind of thing that teachers should not be reinforcing. Over the last 10 years, we've seen a 5,000% increase in the number of girls sent to the gender identity clinic for gender identity
There's another way of
issues.
viewing it, isn't there? This increase could be because people feel more comfortable saying who they are at school rather than waiting until they've left school. So there could be a kind of...
Well, yes, but
it's a more tolerant space to do it in.
I don't actually think it has led to more tolerance. I think if you look at the debate, it's led to a more intolerance, because if you are a trans adult, absolutely you should be allowed to live your life how you please. You should not be subject to discrimination or attacks or abuse. Absolutely, I believe that. But if you are a child who is exploring your sexuality, let's say, and you are told, oh, you're trans, and the internet tells you you're trans, and the internet tells you you should behave like this and identify like this, then actually is that tolerant? Is that in the best interest of the child? Or should they just be supported through whatever issues that they're going through? Because teenage life is difficult, isn't it?
Well, Miriam Cates, if nothing else, this conversation, I think, shows to me that we need to have more conversations about this rather than hide from it. You see all the cancellation of people. Yeah. That doesn't help, does it?
No, it really doesn't. And it's a bit like the COVID parallel, isn't it? The more we can talk about a range of views, the more we're likely to end up in a sensible position.
Well, let's hope so. Miriam Cates, and do come back on this podcast with future views, perhaps when Boris Johnson may or may not resign. We'll wait and see. You've held out the option there. We'll see what happens. Thanks for joining us this week on Choppers Politics. Thank you. Now, I know the subject we ended on is very emotive. And I mean it when I say I want an open debate. So, if you're an MP or a listener, and if you disagree with what Miriam had to say, please do talk to me. Please get in touch, and we might just get you on this show. Email us, chopperspolitics@telegraph.co.uk, or tweet us. We're at Choppers Podcast. Now, cast your minds back to December. Yeah, that's just last month, by the way. The onslaught of leaks surrounding questionable events at Number 10 were just starting to drip through when the PM was dealt a shocking blow by an ally. as Brexit Minister David Frost quit the cabinet and the government. This week, Lord Frost has called for Boris Johnson to reset the government along Tory lines, or risk losing the next general election. And my next guest is quite the expert on conservatism. As a former foreign policy researcher for Margaret Thatcher, and now director of the Margaret Thatcher Centre for Freedom at the Heritage Foundation in Washington. He's Nile Gardiner, and I'm delighted to say he's flown in straight from the US to join us today at the Red Lion pub.
Absolutely. It's great to be back in Brexit, Britain.
Brexit Britain.
Extraordinary times, of course, here in London.
That's right. Well,
very good to be here.
Yes, we're speaking on a day when Boris Johnson's future is under scrutiny once again. But we're speaking really after a few days after David Frost, gave an interview to the Mail Sunday. It was headlined, "Be a true Tory, Boris, or you're out." He said he had the wrong people and the wrong policies around him, and for many that's a call to return to Thatcherite policies. And you used to work with Margaret Thatcher after she left Number 10 Downing Street. Is that a weakness you think in the current government, that they've forgotten that legacy almost?
Yeah, I think that's right, Christopher. And I agreed with every word that David Frost gave in his interview. And of course, we also owe David, I think, an immense debt of gratitude for his role in getting Britain out of the European Union. He was absolutely instrumental in doing so. He's a very, very principled figure, a highly intelligent man, and somebody who I think understands that Conservatives in the UK need to really rediscover conservative ideas and principles. With Boris Johnson, he will go down in history as the man who ultimately delivered Brexit. And, I'm immensely grateful for that. I've met the Prime Minister many times. I've hosted him in Washington before. And his role in history is a great one. At the same time, I do think that the Conservative government needs to go back to Thatcherite roots, basically. And there has been an emphasis upon tax rises, upon increased government spending. We've seen reduced economic freedom and economic liberty. In the UK, we've seen a whole raft of COVID restrictions, far too draconian, in my opinion. And I think the Conservative Party has to rediscover what the Conservative Party is all about, which goes to the heart of what Lord Frost was saying. And on a point of principle, he resigned. I would say that Lord Frost's influence is actually greater now outside of the cabinet, and he is in many ways the voice of a conscience of the Conservative Party at this time. But without a doubt, I do think on many fronts this government needs to reverse course, and this is an important moment for the UK on the world stage. With the UK finally outside of the European Union, it has an opportunity to be a world leader, really, especially with declining US leadership on the world stage under Joe Biden. This is a powerful moment, actually, for Boris Johnson and for the British government. But, unfortunately, I do think that the opportunities that Brexit, is offering have not been fully seized on by this government. This is a moment for British leadership on the world stage. We have to see far more of that. COVID's
gotten away.
Yes.
Of course. I mean, you can definitely argue that, can't you? Because COVID broke like a tidal wave on our shores, didn't it, shortly after we left the European Union? And that could be... So it's kind of paused, isn't it, what you're describing, if it was ever there. But you look around the team around Boris Johnson, do you see people who can do that now that David Frost has left the government?
Well, I think in the cabinet, there are many highly capable people, and I would include figures like Priti Patel, Home Secretary, who I think is an extremely sound politician. I think Liz Truss is actually doing a very good job as Foreign Secretary. She's far more robust than Dominic Raab. And there are figures of tremendous ability and talent within the cabinet. But, the leadership direction has to come from the very top. And Brexit Britain should be a force for free markets, for free trade, for robust leadership on the international stage. And at the moment, we are seeing some mixed messaging coming from the United Kingdom. And this is such a pivotal moment for the UK, the world's fifth largest economy. It is the one country, I think, in Europe that is prepared to really stand up to the Russian bear on the eastern flank. There's so much at the moment that Britain could be doing more, in many, many respects. And I think that, this is a moment when we have to see strong, bold British leadership on the international stage. But you cannot project that, if you are undermining that with policies at home that many Conservative voters do not deem to be conservative.
Examples being, I mean, they have to increase taxes to pay for the cost of COVID. So, including taxation in that, the NIC's increase 1.25% in April, is that included in your list there? Things that are not.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of these tax rises are the antithesis of Margaret Thatcher's vision. She would be cutting taxes right now, promoting, I think, the entrepreneurial spirit of the British people, really. And this is a truly great nation. It's been freed of the shackles of the European Union. We don't need more EU-style, regulations or taxes. We need to see Britain, carving its way forward as a truly sovereign nation with a tremendous self-belief and self-confidence. And that has to include economic policies that free people from government regulation, from high taxes, rather than the other way around.
And that's the message, you think, which the Northern England seats can learn. Do you think they would welcome that, would they? These red wall seats? There's a feeling, isn't there, that to almost to pander to these red wall seats, you need to do more kind of Labour-type interventionist policies. That may be part of the thinking in government at the moment. Yeah,
I mean, certainly I think that's an extremely important point. But, a point that my former boss, Margaret Thatcher, made, which is that in order to win elections, in order to be successful, you have to listen to the beating heart of Middle England. And I think that a big danger for the Conservative Party right now is that they've moved away from listening to Middle England, to their traditional Conservative voters. And that's a very dangerous path forward. And I think that certainly this government has to listen to its traditional core base. That's the core of the Conservative vote. And if they're not going to listen to the beating heart of Middle England, I think there's major trouble ahead for the Conservatives, actually. You're director of the Margaret Thatcher Centre for Freedom at the Heritage Foundation in America. How do you view the special relationship? Does it even exist? Some say it's an idea we cling to in this country to feel relevant to America. It's a very good question. I think it certainly does exist. And regardless of who is in the White House or in Downing Street, it's going to continue because of the tremendous intelligence, military, economic ties that are in place. However, it's being weakened by Joe Biden. He is someone who is intensely anti-Brexit. He doesn't have a lot of affection for the special relationship. And I think that he's doing a lot of damage, actually, to the special relationship in so many ways. And you look at the way he's approached the Northern Ireland Protocol, the way he's actively undermined a US-UK trade deal. On the other hand, though, I think there is hope for the special relationship, because if you look at those individuals who are vying to lead the United States post-Biden on the Conservative side, you look at figures like Nikki Haley, for example, or Mike Pence, or Mike Pompeo, Ted Cruz. I mean, these are all big supporters of the US-UK special relationship. They're all big Brexit backers. What advice would you give to the government now to try and, whatever you say about the special relationship, the Biden administration is in there, isn't it, for another two years or so? What's your advice to Boris Johnson's government? As it stands today, I mean, the advice that I would give, and the advice I've already given as well to members of the Prime Minister's team, is that Britain has to stand up for itself on the world stage. It's got to stand up to Joe Biden. If Joe Biden wants to lecture the UK over the Northern Ireland Protocol, Boris Johnson should just tell him to go away, because that's not the role of the US president to tell the British people how to decide their own policies. The Prime Minister has to be a lot tougher, actually, towards Biden. At the risk of threatening or damaging the so-called special relationship? Well, there are moments in the special relationship when you've just got to stand up to, a US president. And today we have one of those moments, really. I do think that if Boris adopted a more robust stance towards Biden, it would be a popular move, actually, with the British people. It would be popular with a lot of Americans as well. US Conservatives would cheer that. So, Boris has just got to stand up for his country on the world stage and tell Biden to mind his own business. Have you seen the film Love Actually? Yes, I have. So you're calling for a Hugh Grant moment for Boris Johnson, aren't you, at the end, when he calls out the US president on the global stage, doesn't he? Actually, I think he should do that with Biden, because Biden, I think, is an exceptionally bad president, and he's no friend of Britain. Well, Nile Gardiner, flown in from America just today. Thank you for joining us today. My pleasure. Thanks very much, Politics. Great to have you on. Thank you. Thank you. Well, that's all for this week. To keep track of how politicians of all persuasions are reacting to parties and possible plots, please do sign up to my newsletter. It's called Choppers Politics, and it goes straight to your inbox every day.
The link to sign up is in the show notes to this episode. And do please keep an eye out for my Peterborough Diary column on the Telegraph website every Friday at 7 p.m. and in Saturday's newspaper. Thank you to my guests, Andrew Bridgen MP, Miriam Cates MP, and of course, Nile Gardiner. Thank you to my producers, Giles Gear, Louisa Wells, and Theo Luludis. And most importantly, thank you to you for listening. We wouldn't be able to make this podcast without Telegraph subscribers, and so, if you aren't one already, and if you enjoyed this show, why not go to telegraph.co.uk/chopper and sign up right now. And if you sign up before the end of January, you'll even get a free Fitbit to help you with that January health kick. Don't say we don't treat you. Finally, please do buy a copy, if you can, of the Daily Telegraph. I know you won't regret it. Until next time, though, cheerio!